we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
This is James O'Neill. A 45-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after stabbing two men in London's Golders Green in what police are treating as a terrorist incident. The victims, aged 34 and 76, were seriously injured but are in stable condition. The attacks occurred near a synagogue and nearby locations, and the suspect also allegedly attempted to stab police before being subdued with a taser and arrested. Counterterrorism officers have taken over the investigation. The incident has intensified concerns about anti-Semitism in the UK, prompting calls from officials and community leaders for stronger action to protect Jewish communities. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said he maintains a good personal relationship with President Donald Trump, despite recent disagreements over the Iran conflict. Merz had criticized U.S. strategy, saying Iran was humiliating the United States and stalled negotiations, comments that drew a sharp rebuke from Trump. Merz reiterated that Iran must not obtain nuclear weapons, but expressed concern about the conflict's economic impact, particularly disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz affecting energy supplies. He also noted ongoing coordination between Germany, Europe, and the U.S., while emphasizing Germany's growing leadership role within NATO. The United States has formed a six-nation coalition with Bolivia, Costa Rica, Guyana, Paraguay, and Trinidad and Tobago to pressure China over its involvement in two Panama Canal ports, citing concerns about Panama's sovereignty and global trade. The move aligns with broader U.S. efforts to limit Chinese influence in Latin America. China rejected the accusations as baseless and accused the U.S. of politicizing the issue. The dispute follows a Panamanian court ruling that voided contracts held by a Hong Kong-based company, which has since sought international arbitration and compensation exceeding $2 billion. Australia's annual inflation rose to 4.6% in March of 2026, the highest level since September of 2023, driven largely by surging fuel costs linked to the conflict in the Middle East. Monthly inflation increased 1.1%, with automotive fuel prices jumping 32.8%, including sharp rises in petrol and diesel. Housing and electricity costs also contributed, with electricity up 25.4% year over year following the removal of rebates. Underlying inflation remained at 3.3%. The data comes ahead of the Reserve Bank of Australia's May 5th rate decision, with economists expecting a 25 basis point increase. A Spanish study found that many young people in Spain increasingly view mass migration as a real threat, associating it with rising crime and believing there are too many migrants. The survey showed significant increases since 2020 in support of migrant assimilation and perceptions of delinquency linked to migration. At the same time, fewer respondents believe migrants take jobs, and about half still view migration as economically necessary. The study also noted declining trust in democracy, with many expressing dissatisfaction and some openness to authoritarian approaches. Political ideology, education, and gender were key factors shaping attitudes towards migration. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage revealed that his home was targeted in a firebombing attack last year, involving an incendiary device pushed through his letterbox. He said the attack caused limited damage, no injuries, and police were unable to identify suspects. Farage has kept the incident private to avoid encouraging copycat attacks, but disclosed it after reports surfaced about a £5 million gift he received for personal security. The donation has drawn scrutiny from political opponents over disclosure rules. The revelation comes ahead of local elections, with Farage predicting strong gains for his party amid broader concerns about political violence. Baroness Kate Hoey.
Almost have to compare him in a way, although not politically, with the way Trump has been treated.
Just thinking that. Yeah.
The way his name almost, with some people, actually makes them kind of go into a rage.
For The World Today, I'm James O'Neill. Now the protagonists.
You're at home on a Sunday, there's a knock on the door. You answer it, two ASIO officers are there. They hand you a warrant, signed not by a court, but by a politician, the Attorney General. They demand that you come to answer questions about your brother who's been politically active on Gaza. You start to object and they tell you if you object, you can go to jail for 5 years. You call your lawyer. The lawyer turns up to the questioning with you. But the lawyer objects to some of the questioning. So ASIO kicks out the lawyer. ASIO then asks questions for up to 24 hours. You have to answer every question. No privilege against self-incrimination. No privacy. If you refuse to answer all the questions, you can go to jail for up to 5 years. 24 hours of this compulsory questioning, and then they then spit you out onto the street. And if you tell anyone what happened, about the secret questioning, about the visit by ASIO, you can also go to jail. This is not some sort of dystopia. This is what Labor wants to make permanent. The next sitting week when Parliament returns, the major parties want to make these coercive questioning powers for ASIO permanent. Let's be clear, this is a slippery slope towards fascism. Now the war parties are playing games with you on this, pretending to oppose it, but really having done a secret deal to ram it through Parliament. Now the Liberals, a handful of them are publicly opposing the bill, but the party's locked in to support it. They get to pretend to have a conscience while giving ASIO everything they want. Well, One Nation, they're kicking up a stink on social media, but every single time ASIO has asked for extra powers, they've given it to them in Parliament. And on this bill, One Nation supported it going to a secret committee, populated only by Labor and the Liberal Party, so that they could try and push it through in secret in Parliament. And the most hypocritical of all, well, that's got to be the Labor Party. When these laws were first put on the statute books in 2003, Anthony Albanese, the now leader of the Labor Party, actively campaigned against them, calling them out for the abuse that they are. The Greens opposed these laws in 2003 when they were first introduced, and we've opposed every time that Labor or the Coalition have sought to extend them. And I can tell you this, we'll be in the Parliament doing everything to stop the passage of this bill when it comes back. If you agree with us, if you want to stop this toxic ASIO Bill number 2, then share this.
Authorised by Jay McCall.
This is a complete outrage. This is absolutely ridiculous.
We're about to get arrested for standing outside a courtroom with signs that tell jurors that they have an absolute right to acquit based on their conscience.
This is a complete outrage. This is absolutely ridiculous. I am merely stating the law. I'm being handcuffed behind my back. This is ridiculous. And what a complete mess. What a complete mess. The right to a fair trial is one of the basic rights under the European Convention of Human Rights. Jurors need to hear the whole truth, and jurors have a right to acquit according to their conscience.
To the Protagonists, I'm here, partially alive, but we've got some serious stuff to talk about. You know, the old Pet Shop Boys song, "We're all criminals. Look, Ma, we're all criminals now," and more so than ever. Governments in democratic countries are getting away with murder. They're rapidly ratcheting up censorship and control of the internet, monitoring of individuals, public surveillance, placing restrictions on legal speech and public protest, and trampling on our human and private property rights. Governments face less and less media scrutiny or opposition from the crossbenchers or from the judiciary, so their laws and behaviours are normalised. And what of the vaulted democratic values these governments relied upon to massage the public retained authority? Our guest today, Robert Barwick, National Chairman of the Australian Citizens Party, Robin Tilbrook, Solicitor and Leader and Chairman of the English Democrats and Chairman of the Workers of England Union, and Tony Nikolic, lawyer, criminologist and advocate for human rights. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Got through that bit okay, so we're partway there. can't breathe today. That's my trouble at the moment, which is probably a blessing to some. Robbie, we played a clip there, and the clip of the first one, and it had sure not your party, but the point he was making is that they're about to dispel with all of our rights, our a right of being an individual as an Australian citizen. And that was for last week, and we had all those delays. But what do we do? How can we stop the inclination and the determination, for example, in Australia, of the Albanese government wanting to absolutely massacre our rights, all for our own safety, of course, which it's not for that at all. How do we protect what is so important to every individual and citizen of Australia?
Well, we're trying to give people a pretty broad perspective on this, because the specific bill, this ASIO Bill number 2 that David Shoebridge was talking about in that clip, and David is the Greens spokesman on this issue. He's also a barrister, so he understands the nature of the bill very well. It's actually a very good clip to describe the law. What people really need to appreciate is the party referenced where Anthony Albanese opposed this law in 2003. That's what people should be wondering about. Hang on, what 2003? That's 23 years ago. What's the deal with that? Well, this power, this extreme interrogation power, was part of a suite of laws that the Howard government unveiled after 9/11, and in the post 9/11 hysteria, which was, it felt justified, of course. 9/11 was probably still is the most shocking event in any of our lifetimes. Everything was justified. Oh, we need these powers to stop terrorist attacks. Now, what really shocks me at the moment, Mike, is that there's been barely a whimper about this law now compared to 2003. It was an enormous debate back in 2003. This power was extremely controversial. Our party led the opposition to it at the time, but we were just part of the opposition. It was big, and Labor, people like Albanese, dug their heels in and they wouldn't pass it. Simon Creedon, who was the leader, called it, accused the Howard government of establishing a police state. Albanese himself, in his contribution to the debate, he quoted Hermann Goering from the Nuremberg trials, and he likened these powers to the Nazis. Now that's a very strong comparison to make, but he made it. David Jull at the time was the government's own head of the relevant committee that was charged with looking at the specific bill then. He said this bill, the powers in this bill, will erode democracy. That was his conclusion from his report. It took 15 months of fierce debate to pass it, and Labor only eventually relented when the government agreed to add a sunset clause to acknowledge that powers like these should only ever be temporary, right? So in the extreme panic about will there be more terrorist attacks, their justification was, well, you need ASIO to have these extraordinary interrogation powers in the scenario of a ticking time bomb where it's got to get the information that can save us from a mass casualty terrorist attack. Well, we have gone so far down a certain path since then that they have now expanded these powers way beyond counterterrorism to literally everything ASIO does. ASIO, as a matter of course, now can grab people, interrogate them. It doesn't need a warrant from a judge. All it needs is the approval of a politician, the Attorney General. You don't have the right to silence, and you don't even get to pick your own lawyer to be present for this kind of interrogation. And they can do that for everything. There's no longer this overwhelming justification. Oh, what if there's a ticking time bomb and we've got to stop a mass casualty attack? Now, this is a matter of course now for ASIO. And then so this is what Albanese is doing for them. And on top of that, he will take away the sunset clause. So these now become permanent secret police powers. And people need to think, well, how come this is not controversial? How come the guy who compared it to the Nazis is now the one pushing it? What does this mean we have become as a society? And I will say, just to wrap this up, the word is getting out now. Our party is. I'll take a bit of credit here. We found this bill in early January. Nobody knew about it. We're the ones that have made an issue out of it. It is now reverberating everywhere. There's echoes all over the internet. People are making posts all over the place. I think we're going to have a fierce debate in the Senate when it comes back. There may even be a small chance that we'll stop it, or at least stop them removing the sunset clause. I'm not quite sure, but certainly the politics have changed in a few months thanks to our work. And that, means that, maybe just like the way that the coalition split over the hate crimes bill back in January, it didn't stop it, but they split over it because for the first time they actually paid attention to the nature of the laws. Maybe we can get something similar on this ASIO bill and get people asking questions about why are we so cavalierly giving such extraordinary extreme powers in a country that claims to be a democracy.
Tony Nikolic, while we're on the subject of Australia, what's your thoughts?
Oh, I think it's an extraordinary overreach. For me, it's one of those powers that was really brought in after 9/11 in the sense of where they wanted to address what we call the folk devil. That really you can trace back to Stanley Cohen's moral panics and those folk devils that are created in the media. Now, obviously, there may have been a legitimate purpose upon which they brought it, but the sunset clause is a very legitimate concern. What's happening here is ASIO, in my view, didn't even want some of these. However, Parliament's actually gone one step further. But, we can trace this back through the history of criminology and penology, and this can go all the way back to, say, Caesar Beccaria, and he was a criminologist in the 1700s that spoke about this criminal class. But one thing you'll find in terms of from Caesar's legions all the way up until, say, today's criminological theory, it's always been based on a folk devil. So someone becomes a target. Now, whether it's extremism, whether it's another group, or whether it's something else out there, anti-vaxxers, whatever it is, sovereign citizens, there's always a folk devil that's socially constructed in the media. And we need to undertake those sorts of theories, because at the end of the day, whether we go from the issues of Caesar back in, 10 BC or whatever it was, up until now, what we're seeing is a long line of issues. And even going back to Caesar's time, he was talking about if we censor, apply controls, and understand that the population knows that, the population then starts to look within itself. And nothing better confirms that than Jeremy Bentham's theory of the panopticon, and which was extended on by Michel Foucault. Now, the panopticon was essentially it's a metaphor, it's a central, like a prison with architecture of wings, and through that central architecture, they get to see down the wing. And through that process, everyone now starts to believe that they're being watched all the time. So this sense of self-policing starts occurring. And in this, what we're starting to see is where people start to not only censor themselves, but they inbuild and imprint this knowledge upon society, where if I say something, someone could hear or see me. And this is exactly what the ASIO bill is tapping into. We're going back to Caesar's times, where a part of social control becomes that self-mechanism where society starts to look at itself. And it's an extraordinary power that it's going outside the ordinary criminal process. And I've worked in some of those more discreet processes where it's just you and a client taking questions, and the lawyer has very limited scope to ask or object or do anything. And one of the most extraordinary powers is they're extended this to young children. And David Shoebridge was an architect in one of the Senate inquiries here, where a young 14-year-old was being groomed, but not in the sense we're talking about. The scathing attack from David Shoebridge, and notably so, was the fact that he indicated that it may have been the police who were grooming this child to undertake certain conduct. That's alarming. And this is where we're going. So when we start seeing people being pulled off the streets, we can only create some sort of an analogy or a comparison to eras where, and I never like saying it, but it's an unfortunate way, where Gestapo was dragging people off the streets. I'm not drawing that parallel. I'm just saying that there's very little comparison to that.
Anthony Albanese did, Tony.
So, in my view, it's a long line, Mike, of criminological and penology theory, and we can't escape from that because they're the processes upon which every one of those philosophers and people have indicated that the way to control society is by implementing measures. And again, what are we seeing, Mike? Exactly what you said in the introduction. Censorship. We're seeing control. We're seeing these social controls. We're seeing laws. The more laws you create, the more laws are going to be broken. Therefore, we create a greater criminal class.
Robin, thank you for joining us. It's been a bit of a journey, and we're back again, sort of, and we're getting there slowly, but lots of challenges. Maybe we could use your services in the UK to shut some people down. Anyway, that's another story, and I'm being quite bitchy. But we looked at Trudy Warner. She's an example of how your police or how the laws have just gone nuts. Tell us about the UK, and because we're not a Robinson Crusoe here, we are sort of almost joined at the hip with Starmer, aren't we?
Well, we've got very similar things going on, really. We've got an attempt to reduce the right to jury trial, particularly if you're accused of some sort of hate speech. At that point, you're not going to be allowed to have a jury trial, and the court will decide whether you're allowed jury trial or not. One of the things that the government's been trying to say is that the reason for doing this is to try and reduce the backlog of trials, which is something that the government itself has created through ill-advised budget cuts and all sorts of restrictions on the time that the court can sit. So instead of sorting out the restrictions that they've created, they want to reduce our right to jury trial and remove what is actually one of the key foundations of English liberty, yet when it's pointed out that their proposals wouldn't make much difference, they say they want to do it anyway, and it's clear that it's for basically ideological or political reasons. They don't like jury trials because that's citizens deciding on whether or not somebody's guilty or innocent. The lady who was arrested was pointing out that juries have traditionally in England had the right to acquit, even if the law would say that that the person was guilty. And of course, what it does is it introduces an element of common sense into the whole legal process, which otherwise would be completely lacking, because the judges here are selected by the Judicial Appointments Commission, which was created by Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister. And they say that they won't even consider an application from a potential judge unless he can demonstrate a lifetime's commitment to equality and diversity. So consequently, what you've got is politicised and obviously an intended to be politicised appointment of the judiciary. And so if you are in any way a regime opponent, then you're going to be denied jury trial. That's the kind of approach that's being adopted here, as well as all sorts of measures to try and restrict free speech generally.
And not being reported that much at all by legacy media, and also a lot of the and I used to call it independent media after a conversation today with a friend. Independent media is just about done. It's alt media with strings attached. Just have to read davidahughes.net. davidahughes.net will explain what I'm talking about. But the mainstream media should be, Robbie, waving the red flags. But we saw what happened with COVID. Why are they so compliant at the moment?
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
Were you asking me?
No, sorry, I was asking Robbie. Sorry.
Robbie.
Yes. It's like a Robin, but there's a.
Call me.
Yeah, one's Robbie.
For the sake of today, you can call me Robert.
Robert. Okay, Robert.
Look, there's a couple of things here. I mean, I think there's an element where the regime is protecting itself. We have a uni-party phenomenon in Australia, and I know it's not only in Australia, but you've got a public that hates it and is turning away from it in droves, and so we see that in the polls in Australia at the moment, which is unprecedented. And this has always been on the cards, though, because in my view, the two major parties have been way too similar for too long, and they've taken to serving a corporate elite instead of the people, and as a result, the people have suffered and the corporate elite have profited. And in order to maintain that system, the regime has to protect itself, and part of the regime is the media. It's part of the regime. It's not the fourth estate that's there to keep them honest. There's the media proprietors themselves are part of the elites, and we've got a very concentrated media in Australia. And if you just want an example in relation to this very subject, take the ASIO bill. Now you're talking to the guy who led. If I told you what I did in 2002, 2003 to stop this bill the first time, it's an incredible story. We took a year to fight this, and we led it, and we forced Labor to shift policy on it. We just flooded them with phone calls, and that was one of the first seven laws they passed in the wake of 9/11. And we have monitored it every step of the way since. And the last time we took count, there were over 100 of these anti-terrorism laws that are all awful in their own way, in terms of being far-reaching laws that just totally trash our principles that are supposed to protect the public from government overreach. An example of that is 2014, the Abbott government passed a law that says journalists can now be jailed for up to 10 years for reporting on an ASIO operation. That's a law in Australia. If you're a journalist and you report an ASIO operation, you go to jail for up to 10 years. So what is this agency that's being protected so much? Anyway, we've monitored this very closely. But I've been apologising to everyone all year because I only found out about this bill in January, yet it was introduced in Parliament last year and went to an inquiry, and there are only 6 submissions. Now, our party would have been all over it, but we're not omniscient. We don't know everything. We rely on the media to report to us sometimes when there's bills been introduced into Parliament. We've got other things that we do as well, and no one talked about it. No one in the media talked about this extraordinary bill being introduced into Parliament. So I stumbled across it unintentionally in January when I was looking at ASIO in relation to what I consider its failures regarding the Bondi Beach terrorist attack. That's just the media deciding as a collective, well, these kinds of extraordinary powers are not news anymore. This is the new normal. And that's the term we started hearing in COVID, remember?
Robin, with an N, tell me the mainstream media, I would imagine GB News to an extent would be waving red flags and all that sort of stuff. But you know, just on just looking at the media landscape, not all alt media, but some, and if you look at the legacy media, you got GB News, but the rest of them sort of going along for the ride, aren't they? They don't mind too much. Why aren't they saying? Why isn't your media in the UK doing a lot more for its readers, its viewers, its listeners? It seems to be, and during COVID it was the PR firm for government in implementing terrible, rules and regulations, not laws, but rules and regulations, and lockdowns and deaths because of the jab and whatever. Why isn't your media, why haven't they learnt what they did once a few years ago should not be allowed anymore? And it's not in their subscribers' best interest, and they would have more respect for them if they reported it actually as it is.
Well, that's a very good question. I think it's one that's quite difficult to answer. Basically, during lockdown and the COVID scare, we did wind up with all the mainstream media refusing to report any disagreement with the agenda that was being pushed out. No contrary narratives were allowed, as the BBC put it, and we just didn't get any fair reporting or balanced reporting at all. And I think what we saw there really was that the system is much more of a united entity than it had previously been openly revealed. And any pretense that we lived in a so-called liberal democracy was cast aside, I think, and it was pretty clear that we didn't live in any such regime at all. We lived in an authoritarian regime where the state and the powers that be were deciding not only what should happen, but what we should be told about it. And the proprietors of the media went along with that, and they partly went along with it because they got subsidies from the state to do it. But they also, I think, went along with it for ideological reasons, because I think what you would find is that there is a commitment at editorial level throughout the various mainstream media entities to so-called multiculturalism. And the thing about multiculturalism is that you've got this concept of equality and diversity. Well, equality and diversity are, in terms of definitions of the words, they are mutually incompatible concepts. So what you've got is an oxymoron, and the reason that you've got it isn't because they mean it literally. It's a sort of jargon expression for statist multiculturalists, and the statist multiculturalist wants to impose multiculturalism against the will of society using the state. So what you've got both there and here is a general push to increase the powers of the state. And personally, I think that this is also linked to the sort of Fabian agenda of trying to use softly approach to turn the country into basically a communist state.
Just while we're at it, Robin, there has been very little mainstream reporting on the Starmer rent boy trial. Any suggestions why this might be?
Well, the same thing. It comes after several weeks of mounting pressure over his determination to appoint his friend Mendelssohn to be the ambassador in America, even though it was known that he was a personal friend and regular socializing with Epstein, and ignoring all the sort of official vetting systems. And what we've also got there is a situation where 3 Ukrainian rent boys are accused of having attacked property that belonged to Starmer, but which nobody that didn't know him would know that it was anything to do with him, because it was property that it wasn't. There was no publicity over that property. So these 3 rent boys obviously knew him, and one of the things that's been rather strange, and in fact George Galloway made this point very amusingly. He insisted on saying that what the rent boys had done was arsoning Mr. Starmer's property, arsoning it.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? I believe that we're going to send a rocket to one of the outposts in the galaxy. I think it's called Uranus. I'm not too sure anyway. The terrible, but
something like that, yes.
and apparently the Russians did it anyway. Can't forget them Russians. They did all those bad things. They had gold teeth. But all those terrible jokes about Starmer and the rent boys, which I won't go into that, but we need to have that over a good Sunday split roast. Anyway, that's another thing. But Tony, the mainstream media, look at the UK, look at Australia, they're still performing their PR duties to government, aren't they?
Oh, indeed. The way I see it, and I've written about this in The Spectator Australia, where truth is knowledge held back by power. And if we take it all the way back to the Julius Caesar days, I think it was 58 to 49 BC, censure and control of the populations, including territorial mapping. Again, it's not new, it's just the technology has changed. And when we have a look at how the media has been operating, they're not that individual autonomous agent anymore. They've become PR machines for the state apparatus. And that is the concern. Once we take that independence away, then society becomes beholden to a narrative that is being tightly controlled. And we see that with the slow encroachment in other areas such as the social media bans, the under 16 social media bans, and the censorship laws, and particularly over COVID, which was the trial period for a lot of this. And I stood up, and I still stand up for that stuff today, and I don't stop. But importantly, in terms of how we see this from a global perspective, we need to look at it. There's no comparable democracy in the Five Eyes nations that arrest a non-suspect without due process and independent judicial authorisation. I think for any lawyer or barrister that's a concern. And in this case, the new bill, well, it preserves the Attorney General applying for these warrants, if you want to call it, and no one knows until it's executed. And so when you have a look at it, and Robin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the United Kingdom, the equivalent compulsory information gathering under the Investigative Powers Act, I think it was 2016, requires a judicial commissioner to approve what they call the double lock. And in Canada, warrants are issued under the CSIS Act, 1985, and that requires federal authorisation. But here in Australia, you only need the Attorney General, and that's done in secrecy. And so we don't get any judicial oversight until such time as that warrant is executed. That is alarming. Essentially, as I said, they can literally walk up to you, take you off the street, and put you in for questioning. Now, I like the term the UK used, which is the double lock, and the double lock is there because we're getting this oversight. Here, we're not getting that oversight in Australia. So Australia, in a geopolitical and intelligence type of scenario, is an outlier here, and it's like it's a race to the bottom, if you want to call it, in terms of who can impinge upon whose rights quicker. And we're seeing this in a lot of the democratic countries. So when we look at the Five Eyes, are they really protecting the people, or are they just implementing Julius Caesar's vision, which was total population control? They're not independent. The media are acting on orders. And that is why it was purely the independent media and the social media who have come out, and they're the ones exposing it. And obviously you've got doctors, lawyers, independent of the larger networks, again, that are implementing this independent data. And that's where I came up with truth is knowledge, but it's being held back by power.
It's pretty interesting, the Aussie media, because, again, and I'm sure that similar things happen in the UK, because Ofcom are the go-between, the agent between the media and the government, just about. But in Australia, we have the Prime Minister now, because he can't give them 250 million, but what he can do is ensure that the media, legacy media here, will get its buttons, as they would say, its return on social media. So they're wanting Google and all the others to forward a check to the media for the amount that they've used. And if they don't, I think, Robbie, they're going to put it up they're going to impose a tax on it. I think it's like 13 or 17%. I could be wrong there. And the other thing too, you mentioned, we were talking about democracy in the UK, but in the EU. EU, the Baltic area, you have Ukraine, who now want to base their democracy, because we are fighting for the democracy of Ukraine, because they just drag people out of their cars and send them to the front line. Good luck, goodbye, say your prayers. But they're also, they want to, under the Zelensky's, which would make Trump happy, they want to become the Israel of the EU. And that's very scary indeed, and it would suggest that the war will continue for many, many, many years, as Trump has alluded to in the Strait of Hormuz, which is again bringing a lot of excitement to the free world, which is no longer free. Robbie, can you just tell me, in Australia, I'm just going to read this here. In Australia, social media censorship is widespread, but it's more targeted here, isn't it, against the dissidents and groups rather than ordinary people. It is changing, though, isn't it? It is starting. I mean, I saw the shootings of those poor coppers. Terrible, terrible thing. But it's funny how they then branded other groups and then the individuals of those groups as potential terrorists. And one of those groups were, because of the Bondi, they were the farmers. They're just terrible creatures. I mean, anybody with a gun is a potential terrorist. And back to the title, we're all criminals now, and they're treating us as we're criminals. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think that we are perhaps have reached the point of no return because we haven't got an opposition that will protect us? And I don't care what anybody says. There's little difference between the philosophies of the current opposition, federal opposition, and the government. So if we haven't got an opposition, who's going to protect us?
Well, I like the term that Tony used. I hadn't heard that before, folk devil, because it rings true with what I have experienced. I remember when Martin Bryant shot up Port Arthur in 1996, and then they brought in the gun laws, the national gun laws. I was much younger then, of course, but at the time I'm thinking they're bringing in laws that assume everyone is a mass murderer. Everyone could be a mass murderer. So one person does something, but they've got to bring in laws that assume everyone is has to be suspected of that. And the same when they, a few years later, 5 years later, with these post 9/11 terrorism laws, they bring in laws that say everyone's a potential terrorist, and we've got to have these powers now. But who's bringing in the laws? These governments that do not want to be constrained by the system of checks and balances that we were brought up being taught in school is what made our system of politics and law superior to the rest of the world and all those authoritarian regimes. So what really motivated this is governments moving down a more and more authoritarian path, and the public have sort of been conditioned to go along with it because of the folk devil's idea. Oh, everyone out there is a potential problem, right? And it's just become matter of course now. That is the way everything's presented, and you're supposed to go along with it. At a certain point, we need to get people to go back and relook at the basics of these principles of law that we're told are so important. Why you have constraints on government power, why you have checks and balances, and actually say, well, okay, what have we achieved by going in this direction? Because it's not as if we have eradicated all crime or anything like that. And in fact, if we can just go back to ASIO for a second, I alluded to it before, with all these enormous powers that ASIO has, it was unable to stop the Bondi massacre perpetrated by people known to the agency. They had the powers, they know the perpetrators, yet they're unable to stop it. And that's what we were told these powers were for, right? So it's never what we're presented as if these are the panacea that'll fix everything. That argument never works, and then you've got to go back to, okay, what have we achieved by going in this direction? And I think one last comment on it. I was quite struck in January that despite what I've said before, there's been over 100 of these kinds of laws passed since 9/11. They've all just passed quite easily. For the first time ever, in January, Anthony Albanese puts up these hate crimes laws, hate group laws. He gave the Parliament 1 week to look at them, and they went on a revolt. They actually dug their heels in and refused to pass them. And then he had to do a special deal with the Liberals to get a version of it through, right? We hadn't seen that before. We've monitored this closely for 25 years. We had not seen that before. So maybe post-COVID and with all, there's a general awakening here of, hang on, we should be looking at what governments are doing, and we might be able to get some standards back.
Tony, just add to that, please. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, for me, a striking feature of what Robert just said there is this sociologist, Emile Durkheim, said you'll never abolish or eliminate crime. All you're going to do is create further instances upon which people are going to find ways to circumvent those new laws. And by introducing new laws, we're introducing a new class of criminal. And that is a significant point. But if I can just take it back one step further, the essence of participatory democracy is we have these Westminster systems and we're supposed to be debating. Unfortunately, what we see here is the expanded use of guillotine orders in the Senate inquiries and Senate, especially when ministers and that are wanting to pass bills. They'll put it on, they'll give a consultation period. And I recall with the disinformation bill, they gave it 7 days and it absolutely got obliterated by the public because they received so many submissions. So what is Parliament doing? Well, they're circumventing that participatory angle by instituting standing order 42, which is the guillotine order, and that guillotine process gives it 1 day consultation, extraordinary measures that impact each and every Australian in every walk of life. It creates these whole new sets of criteria and laws, and they are the very issues that impinge upon our democracy. So I'm becoming a little bit more pessimistic with the use of the term democracy, especially in a system that was designed to allow the people to participate by virtue of representatives who are now passing guillotine orders to deliberately stifle the democratic process. So we don't get a voice, therefore we don't have a representative. The representative is in name only. And that is a striking, glaring issue that we need to do. But if you take that back even one step further, and we take it back, as I said, you can go all the way back to Julius Caesar. But importantly, we need to understand that these censoring processes were put in place for control, and nothing chills us even more, especially as a lawyer or barrister, when the ASIO law itself seeks to undermine the procedural fairness, and in particular criminal procedure, where the right to silence is subverted. And not only the right to silence, but lawyers, doctors, advocates, media, journalists, they'll think twice, for a lawyer before they take a brief. They'll now think about it going, well, who's instructing me and who is my client? I don't want to come under the attention, because not only does my client potentially have a cause of action against them, but me representing them and saying something and advocating it, which is our duty, and we hold that duty when we go and take the bar, and whether we're sworn to the bar or to the court, we take the duty to uphold the instructions of not only the community, the courts, but your client. And that needs to be done in such a way that we should be able to represent our client with absolute vigour and test the evidence. Now, if we can't do that under the threat of being locked up by ASIO, then we don't have a democracy.
I totally agree with you there. Robin, in the UK, I know what should be the priority, but which is the priority for the Met, you think? Because I was reading somewhere where there are the number of crimes that have been solved is very, very low. Someone said that something 87% haven't yet been solved, but they are doing a very good job with those, especially if they're elderly, with placards, and or they're criticising your immigration policies or a political party. What's wrong with the UK at the moment? I mean, by the way, it's a children's program also, so please control yourself. And secondly, we have only got about 15 minutes left, so I don't think we'd like to be here till midnight. So just tell us in brief what is wrong with the UK at the moment.
Yes, you certainly ask a large question and give a short time to answer it. So yeah, the Metropolitan Police are very poor at solving crimes. I think you actually overstated what percentage they solve. If you're talking about I don't know, shoplifting, for example, they solve virtually none. They do solve some traffic crimes because either they see them or and then they solve them, or they don't see them and so they don't appear on the figures. But the thing that they're most keen on dealing with is so-called hate crimes, which would include, I would think that protester woman who was trying to point out what has been a part of jury trials for centuries, and in fact, one of the reasons why we had the Glorious Revolution was because the judges, in particular Judge Jeffreys, was trying to say that the jury had to do what he told them to do, and they refused, and they were going to. He was trying to imprison jurors, and it's been a specific part of the English Constitution ever since the Glorious Revolution that juries must be allowed to make their decision without being pressured and influenced by officialdom. And so it is a system that those who have the kind of agendas that you've been talking about of trying to impose authoritarian measures, they don't really like juries, and the number of and types of cases where juries have been involved have been dramatically reduced over the last 50 or 60 years, and there's a sort of constant attack on the jury system, and of course it was the jury system that was really the key part of preserving English liberty over the centuries. It wasn't the judges. The judges were generally doing whatever the politicians wanted, and they're very much doing that now. And so I think we've got a big problem. It's getting bigger. It's not following exactly the same path as you're getting in Australia, but the general direction is the same. I don't think we're seeing any way in which that's going to be resolved by peaceful measures in the near future. The nearest to that's campaigning to try and reduce state power is reform, and reform seems to be doing all sorts of things which suggest to us that maybe they're not going to be effective even if they do get into power. So I think I'm not very hopeful, really, that we're going to be able to solve the kind of problems that we're getting. And I would just say that there's a famous saying, because most of these type of authoritarian measures are introduced with the politicians talking about necessity, that it's necessary to do this. And there's the famous saying, isn't there, that necessity is the tyrant's plea throughout the ages.
Yeah, it's very scary, because without good laws and good police and good politicians, good media, it doesn't paint a very healthy picture for the future. Robbie, if our media is failing, and I'm using both alt media and legacy media, if our parliamentarians are failing miserably, I mean, for example, crime is on the increase, and yet I don't see anybody putting their hand up to say we're failing. Oh, we'll have our bins and you put machetes in. Oh, you put your grandmother in there too, if you like. So we haven't got a whole lot of good politicians. We've got no good media, or little effective media. The whole process is falling apart. The police are, as Robin mentioned, are more after those that say nasty things. Our future looks pretty ugly, doesn't it?
Yeah, which is why I think we're seeing a very big political shift.
But here's the thing. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. And I know that we're going to say that, yes, it's the minor parties and Pauline Hanson and stuff. You know what happens, because we have to vote here, Robin. We don't have that choice, which is good and bad in some ways. But But when you get to that ballot, it's always, oh, I don't know if I should give them, I don't know what they're really like. And you probably find that unless there's preferences that get people through, you'll have a strong vote for the Conservatives or the Labor Party. So just wanted to butt in there. Sorry about that. Continue.
No, you're right. I mean there's no solution necessarily on the horizon there, but I'm just saying that the intention of the public shows that they have given up on the system, right? I personally think that the phenomenon here, to back Pauline Hanson, from the analysis I've looked at closely, is very similar to what how the comedian and filmmaker Michael Moore predicted Donald Trump would win in 2016. If you've ever seen his famous monologue on this, where he said they just want to, he said, Joe Blow, Billy Bob Blow, all the blows in the heartland of America, they just want to send a wrecking ball into Washington, right? Because they are sick to death of the system failing them all the time. So that phenomenon is happening here, in the face of which I think we're seeing the establishment resort to more police state measures, right, as forms of social control. But as the great English poet Percy Shelley stated, I think it's the greatest. It is the truth of political power for all time, which is that ye are many, they are few. And the elite have always been painfully aware of that, right? So they've got to find ways through divide and conquer and fascist or sort of police state powers to lock down the public, so that politically that is, so that their power isn't threatened. But it doesn't always work, and then you have periods of change. And that's why I'm in politics, because I'm trying to present to the public through measured policies that are based on a commitment to human rights and civil rights and the rule of law, but also economic solutions so the system can work for people again, not just for a vested elite vested interests. That you can do something as revolutionary as the American founding fathers when they designed a system that became the light on the hill for how democracies are supposed to work. It's a long time ago now. Their system is no longer that light on the hill, but they had an intention to create a better system that actually guaranteed people's rights, as imperfect as that was. But we need that kind of intention now, because this has gone way too far. People have to look at the system as a whole, and whatever chance we have, me and my party are going to be in there fighting for solutions that can make that happen.
And you did mention MAGA before, Donald Trump, and I always pay references that you have a MAGA hat.
I did have a MAGA hat.
Sorry.
I've had two. I had a real one as a bit of a joke. My current one is still a MAGA hat, but it says "Make America Go Away."
Very, very good indeed. Which is very sad too, by the way, because many of many of us had great hopes for Donald Trump, but now he even wants to plant his face on the American passport. Give me a bloody break. Anyway, Robin, we're just being serious. If I talk about Trump, it'll go. This will just go to crap. This will be a terrible, terrible poking fun at the buffoon of the year at the moment. And I see that I had to throw this part in. I see that J.D. Vance said that I think that Congress, the Pentagon might be misleading him. Anyway, Robin, the democratic institutional safeguards don't work. Parliament being the first. How do we fix it?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? As you've been talking about, we've got a situation where the police are not effective at dealing with ordinary crime. They've been very captured by the political agenda. We've had a horrific and decades-long scandal of Pakistani Muslim child rape gangs operating here. At least 250,000 girls have been raped over that period and pimped, and the police have been colluding with that, as have politicians. When you've got a country with something as horrific as that going on, you've got a deeply corrupt system that is probably unreformable. And it can only be through political action that there can be a change to that. But it's a huge challenge.
I before we went a bit askew, that means before you went to crap. I just want we were all talking about this is for you, Robin. Still, Starmer, he'll be gone in no time. He won't last a week. He won't last a month. Just for my reckoning, he looks pretty stable at the moment. Is that because of the ineffectiveness of Reform UK with the celebrity game show host Nigel in waiting? Is that because they're not as effective as they should be, and that people are starting to wise up, or is it because of other reasons? Because I did think that Starmer, according to our reports, he was going to get the heave-ho.
So the fundamental architecture, as it were, of this situation is that Starmer won and the Labour Party won the general election. They won with less votes than Piers Corbyn had got, and they won nevertheless what appears on the face of it to be a landslide, with the votes of about 20% of the electorate, and they've got a large majority in the House of Commons. Many of those people are people that never expected to get elected, and probably weren't looked at all carefully by even the Labour Party system, and many of them are really very left-wing indeed, and Starmer, who you might think was an extremist in that respect, nevertheless he seems to be quite moderate by comparison to many of them. So there is an alarm as to what will happen when Starmer is toppled, but you also got fairly low-grade people who would be the alternative. So one person talked about is Angela Rayner, and she's clearly not that bright, and nevertheless, and is also facing a tax inquiry for avoiding tax. So she's somebody with all sorts of problems. There aren't that many contenders to push him out, and he's apparently told the Labour Party, Parliamentary Labour Party, that if he is pushed out as leader, his last act will be to call a general election, and then they'll all lose their jobs. So he's offered to be a sort of Samson figure to bring the house down. But he's I think the general theory at the moment, operating theory at the moment, is that he's had all sorts of scandals. He's clearly been very ineffective as Prime Minister. He's managed to fall out big time with Trump, as you were mentioning. He's also got various scandals sort of chasing him, as we mentioned earlier. But what he's also got is it looks from the opinion polls as we're on May the 7th, we've got local elections occurring across England, Scotland and Wales, and it seems to be a good chance that Labour's going to get absolutely trashed. And if those results really are disastrous, I think Labour MPs are going to be thinking they're going to be losing their seats come the next general election, and at that point they may well show just a little smidgen of courage.
It depends on the turn-up too, or the turnout, because if Labor rally the troops, who knows? But I do agree with you. I think they don't.
I don't think they've got that many. One of the key things we saw in the general election was that they won not because they had managed to get any extra votes at all. They won only because people were so sick, the Conservatives, and their lies and dishonesty and their failures to to do anything that was remotely conservative. I mean, one of the things that Boris Johnson did, he got elected on the ticket that he was going to reduce mass immigration, and as well as sort out the Brexit situation. And he no sooner got in with a large majority, but he vastly increased mass immigration, and we wound up with a situation where we were getting more than 1 million, officially more than 1 million migrants coming in every year.
Interesting.
That was the Conservatives, so-called.
Well, our Conservatives here, Tony, they're pretty pathetic to say the least. And I look at Victoria, for example, Jess Wilson. I mean, it's like, do we want the devil or do we want the devil? That's because they both got similar policies, and we'll reduce crime. Well, look at the Conservatives in Queensland. As far as I can see, they keep telling everybody, adult crime, adult time. The breaking ins to houses and the crime is just rocketing out of control. How do we fix things just quickly? Because it's going to get worse, isn't it, Tony, before it gets better? What do we have to do to protect ourselves against this surveillance state, the big brother attitude, the reduction of our, as I said before, our civil liberties and what we are entitled to do, freedom of movement, speech, or thought, because in the UK you can't think if you're walking past a clinic of some sort, because you'll be locked up praying. So what do we do?
Well, in terms of your devil metaphor, it's a case of, do you vote for the devil with 4 horns or 3 horns? And there's no such thing as conservative here in Australia at the moment, other than the the ones making the most noise in that sense is really Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party. And people may agree or disagree. Right now, that seems to be that alternative that are people harking back to the closest to the Menzies era right now is the One Nation Party, and they are making that noise. And in addition to that, we can't forget that if we're talking about the system we're talking about, then nothing less than a wrecking ball is required, other than appeasing the public, which is where our politicians are. And there's no such thing as conservative other than the One Nation Party. But if we were to take what Robert was saying earlier with respect to, and I'm a big fan of the holistic approach on things, we for instance, we've got the One Nation issue, the ASIO issue, then we've got that's taken in isolation, and everyone will talk about that. Then we'll talk about immigration in isolation to censorship, in isolation to other issues. Well, let's not forget the one thing, that if we're going to look at crime rates and things like that, and as a criminologist, you think about Mertens, and Mertens was talking about the fact that, when we actually incorporate these ideas in society, you're not necessarily reducing crime. Then you've got Kelling and Wilson, who wrote the Broken Window thesis, my apologies, who pretty well, they talk about, Mertens spoke about strain. So you strain your population. How do we put strain on the population? Well, we affect the economy. People start feeling strained. They've got no other outlet. So houses come under pressure. And then what ends up happening, you get graffiti. You look at those graffiti areas, and that's where the broken windows thesis comes in. Well, that then starts becoming an amplifier of crime, because people start saying, well, oh my gosh, look at this area. It's terrible. Look, cars on bricks and, graffiti everywhere. There's broken windows on houses, people fighting, gunshots. And that comes from that strain theory. So we can't look at this in isolation. And that is one of the issues. We keep talking about these singular talking points. We can't look in singularity. We need to look in a holistic sense as to what's happening. Now, with both parties, one will focus on machete crime, the other one will focus on another form of crime, but it's the policy. It's how are we addressing this holistically? Is the economy in shape? Are people allowed to progress? For instance, you go back 20, 30 years, buying a house was, 2.5, 3 times your salary. Now it's at 12 times your salary. So in addition to that, you think of the taxes. That puts more strain on families. Now, mums and dads are struggling. They're at work all the time. and kids don't have that capacity to have that guidance, which is what they had, I guess, when we were growing up. And if you came home late or something, you'd literally get a whooping, and you'd know straight away that we didn't have iPhones and watches. You knew when the street lights came on that there's a whooping coming your way, because that was your discipline. You had discipline. You had a mum. You had a dad. They were doing their hourly time. They were coming home, and so that actually contributes to control. And a disciplined society that way grows up with values, moral values. It has a culture. That culture imprints itself on others. But if we start putting strain and inflation and all this stuff, why? Because we have an out of control, and I call them a political class. When we have that out of control political class, well, you're only impeding the growth of your own nation, and that's not very smart. So the only thing we can do, and what we've discussed here, almost every institution has been mentioned. Nothing less than a wrecking ball, and I say that not in the sense of crashing everything down. I say that in the sense of we need to revisit policies. We need to look at how we manage the economy, how these institutions are managed. We need to look at regulatory capture. We need to look at institutional drift. We need to look at all these things, and more importantly, look at the family unit. Come back to the family unit. We need to abolish this idea of ideology. These things such as toxic masculinity. These are things, you need strong men. Okay, and men need strong women. Okay, and what we're doing is we're increasing this sense of division within our community, and then we're impeding upon that by introducing these gender fluid, non-binary issues. Well, further division. Now, back in World War II, there was a certain person who introduced symbolic or symbols, and hence the term symbolic interactionism. So everyone had a symbol, and I think we all know the Martin Neelmere quote. That is something that we need to understand, because the Reverend Martin Neelmere nailed it in one quote. First they came for the trade unionists. We all know that one. So that sense of belonging has been stripped. Now you're hearing people like Anthony Albanese speak of social cohesion, but he's introduced some of the most divisive policies Australia has ever seen. So when we look at this, we need to look at it holistically. We can't look at it in a unitary type, singular type approach. It is not one issue. It is a combination of issues that are impeding upon this country. And until we address that holistically and address them each as a holistic unit and not singular, we're going to continue to divide, and we're going to continue to create outliers. And those outliers are going to put strain on families, and those families are going to introduce other issues which then divide your nation. And that's the saddest part, I'm saying.
Bit like the old saying, united we stand, divided we fall. You mentioned the wrecking ball, Tony, and I'll leave this with Robin and yourself. And as you give us your contact details, just make comment. The wrecking ball used to be, we bring everybody together. The wrecking ball, in my opinion, is from just about everybody we've mentioned. Government is intentionally creating a wrecking ball. Media, whether it's ultra legacy, is creating that wrecking ball. There other institutions, the same thing. And I think they're doing this because they're trying to create chaos. For the UK, if you want to see what chaos can eventually be like, davidahughes.net. There's 4 parts there. You'll see what I mean. A very good articles and stories, and quite impartial, but very scary to say the least. So we have all these institutions, government, media, you could pick them out of your backside if you wanted to. They're all creating chaos. Robbie, tell us how people can get hold of you, and is this intentional? Is it the old saying, united we stand, divided we fall? Division is what we want. Robert first, and then Robin. Robin. Next.
Well, it's definitely intentional by some people. The best succinct description of a true democracy is Lincoln's: government of, by, and for the people. And so that's the people, not the elites. And so if you're the elite, you're going to want to keep them divided so they can't achieve that. You can follow the Citizens Party on citizensparty.org.au, and we have a citizens report show once a week on YouTube.
And apparently it's the best in the world. You keep telling me. And when
Absolutely.
you came down last week, didn't wear your cap last week either. Quite disappointed. Anyway, Robin, your turn now.
Thank you. So Tony was mentioning about Julius Caesar, but I would also refer to a Roman saying, which is divide et impere, divide and rule. And that is basically what we're seeing our elites trying to do. They are trying to divide us and therefore rule us. And so far as my contact, I think the easiest is my Twitter account is at Robin Tilbrook.
Thank you so much. And Tony Nikolic, you have the final say.
Well, again, it's about bringing people together, stakeholders understand it's not working. It's not a broken window, it's a series of broken issues. Truth is knowledge held back by power. We need unity. You can contact me at TonyNikolic10 on Twitter or aflsolicitors.com.au.
Robert Barwick, National Chairman of Australian Citizens Party. Robin Tilbrook, Solicitor, Leader and Chairman of the English Democrats, with those guns behind him. I'll do whatever he says. They don't work, but they look pretty scary.
They do work.
Do they? I have more respect for you now, sir. And he hides a bottle of whiskey under his desk, but don't tell anybody. And Tony Nikolic, lawyer, criminologist, and advocate for human rights, and the best lawyer in the world. He keeps telling me that too. Thank you so much for your time. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure. We've talked about some things that have been pretty, well, I think the future's stuffed. There was a song, The Future's Not So Bright, and I think that's about the sum of it all. The future is not bright, and I don't know what's going to happen. A dear friend of mine, Havora Morich, he and I are very much alike. Many would say it's that light at the end of the tunnel. In our minds, it's not the light at the end of the tunnel. It's a bloody great big train revving up, coming towards us, and it's very scary. This has been The Protagonists on The World Today.